I'd now like to ask to rejoin me up on stage Malcom, who opened up the conference, and Jonathan, who's out here somewhere. Oh, you're over this side, sorry. Okay, if you guys grab a seat, I'll grab the one at the end here. Okay, oh, there we go. So I thought what would be great, because we did this in Miami, and it actually worked out really well. So I thought, well, if it worked well there, we'll give it another shot.
You should never repeat your successes.
Okay, and we'll go for it. Because over the next sort of 20 minutes or so, let's have a conversation about what we've learned over the last sort of 2 or so days, right? And there's been so much stuff that's been coming out of the woodwork, right? Some of it's very obvious, AI, we're seeing a lot of that. But then there's this theme of trust. There's a whole bunch of other sort of deeper themes that I think are emerging. So Jonathan, I'm going to start with you. For you, what are the 2 or 3 things that have come out of the woodwork that have been an eye-opener or surprising or have actually confirmed what you've been suspecting?
So I think the biggest one is the kind of, that's got me thinking, is the whole question of AI versus commercial model. And, I think I've expressed, the view that I think marketplaces are pretty well positioned. But I think when you begin to think about how you pilot and some of the most important things, actually, how do you get to a commercial model that works in an AI-driven world? Because AI, it comes over to me as intrinsically consumer-driven. And I think Malcolm's point about, in his presentation at the very beginning about performance-based models and so on and how they wrap in, you've got to totally re-engineer the way you think about the monetization of your portals and your listings. So that's kind of the biggest one for me. I think, something in general, and I think it's existed in vendor-paid markets for a very long time, is the whole question of how you really leverage the brand side of the agency relationship. And I think that's becoming much more important in agent-paid markets as well. And I think people are beginning to understand how to leverage that better. So that, to me, is another big theme. And I just love this idea. I mean, it's just a phenomenal, the last session. So those kind of two kind of biggies for me, I think.
Okay. How about for you, Malcom?
I think there'll be more change in the next 5 years than there's been in the past 25 years. I think it'll be driven by the tech, in particular by AI, which will enable portals to provide an experience which is radically different from what we've done hitherto. We saw some great examples over the past few days of personalization, of really understanding what the property seeker is looking for. And I've always been a bit more controversial on this, but I think that a lot of the value add which has traditionally been done by an agent in terms of really understanding what is the buyer looking for will be taken over by the platforms, assuming they do make the necessary investments in the tech. So I think that's one really important thing. We've managed to now work out how to book a holiday without going to an agency and having someone hold our hands. We take money out of our bank accounts without going and asking somebody to pass it through a window. So of course, at some stage, we're going to feel comfortable trusting a platform to enable those transactions to happen. What I think is less clear, and what I think is less clear is what that platform will look like. And I actually think there might be more of a convergence between portals getting more transactional and the biggest agents becoming to look a bit more like portals. And that's, if you remember, my last 2 slides were a little bit about that. There are a lot of API-driven tools, which the Redfins, the biggest of the agents, could also use to make the search experience much more enjoyable, much better working, and to make the whole transaction flow work much better. At the same time, portals also have the opportunity to invest in similar tools as well. So I think it'll be fascinating to see how these models converge.
Can I add one thing to that? I mean, there's a really interesting question here, isn't there, about at what point does the human become important? We don't really know how much we can hand over. You hear that the stats are when you push people into a chat journey that you see a drop-off, etc., versus a human journey. We don't yet know whether that will will change as the sophistication of the chat improves and people go on. So I think there's a really interesting question. But it seems to me that the agent, nobody's ever managed to disrupt the agent very effectively. But it seems what we should be getting on the agent side now is just much more efficiency out of the agents. There's a huge amount of work that can be done by AI. And actually, the agents then become very focused on being out with the customers and so on. And it really is the human touch that becomes important. And I think that's kind of how far you can push that and what you can help the agents, how you can help the agents be efficient.
Yeah.
And answering Simon's kind of question about take rate, the more efficient you can make the agents, the more you can take from them because you are actually substituting for their other costs. So I think all of that's kind of a helpful go-round.
So I will add that it may become less and less clear what an agent is, right? On the one hand, the human beings still going to be employed by the Redfins and the compasses may be fewer and fewer. On the other hand, the kinds of people that portals may have to guide and assist people through a transaction, those will also look and feel a little bit like agents. So I think, again, there's going to be a huge blurring of roles in my view.
Yeah, the way I've have come to the conclusion, I think, is the internet and property portals totally disrupted print, like killed it, okay? And everyone then, I think the statement you had at the beginning is they always overestimate the impact on the short term and underestimate the impact on the long term.
Yeah.
Okay, I think is applicable with agency, real estate agency, and technology. And my thought is, newspapers dead. That was pretty obvious. It wasn't obvious at the beginning, but it got very obvious very quickly. But technology has evolved so fast, and you saw what Devor was talking about, in 1 year or 2 years, it's sort of, 25 years in his view, has been condensed. Your average agent has to lift the game, right? Your average real estate agent has to lift their game, or they do face the reality of a lot of their tasks, their role being totally replaced by a 24/7, doesn't wait around, AI-driven interface. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to say chatbot because I don't know how it's good. It could be voice, it could be whatever, right? Mm. That will do 90% of the tasks probably better than the traditional agent. So then the question is, what does the agent become? Does it become a T-kerner?
Door opener, perhaps?
A key turner, perhaps? Okay, it's been a long few days. A key turner and just walk in, show you around. Mm-hmm. Or does it become a negotiator? But then again, as we talked before, you just have two chatbots that are going to negotiate for you, right? And they'll come to a conclusion like that, right, about what is the price that I'm going to pay and what they will do and so on. So what's the future?
The future is no agents in the current format. That's, for me, absolutely for sure. It will take time, but it will come. So the whole, finding what you want thing, I think that's the easiest one, which data and software will do. Opening doors, that's not really a job in itself, right? And that certainly doesn't require a 3% commission. So there'll be either automatic locks like you have when you pick up a rental car or something like that, or something similar. And then the transaction processing side. Well, negotiation, I think we're going to get far more price transparency. We've heard a lot about some of these AVMs. They're getting very, very good. I think Andy was saying that his was still 5%, 10% out. I think there's some which I've seen in Europe which are looking like they're more like just a few percent out. But the more price transparency you have, the less room there is for that haggling, right? And the more information there is about condition of the item for sale, again, the less scope there is. So I think we talked about matching, negotiation, and then transaction processing. I mean, that's crying out to be automated in one way or another. I know it's difficult and there's public bodies involved and so on, but that will happen. And I think it's probably happening quite quickly on the car side. I think it's probably parallel. So for me, it's clear the traditional role of the agent, will disappear just as fast as the traditional travel agent.
I'm not so convinced because I think you may be underestimating our need for human contact. Yeah. And our trust in the machine versus the human. And I think, actually being shown round by someone, being able to check your kind of your perceptions with them, all of that has quite a value that is underestimated. And I think it's quite hard to replace some of that. And at the end of the day, the human cost of doing that isn't actually, absolutely vast in terms of it. And negotiation, there is a very human element to negotiation as well. And I think it'll be a long time before we get to the sophistication of machines negotiating in that way. So, I mean, my view is, you get rid of a lot of the admin and the paperwork and the stuff that needs to be done in the office, but your agents become much more, the out and about people, seeing, reassuring, doing the human touch stuff. And I wonder if there's a difference in markets that have franchise agents versus corporate agents, in the sense that actually a platform to support franchise agents is actually a much more kind of natural fit with that kind of model of being out and about, so that the platform becomes the thing that effectively supports the agents to be the human face. And I think that's easier in a franchise model kind of world.
So humans aren't going to disappear from this. I think that's
well, if humans
clear.
do disappear, then it doesn't matter.
Don't need to sell any homes.
No,
humans won't disappear from the process entirely. And you go to any bank, if people still go to banks, you can see there's the sort of the ATM bit up front, just machines, and then there are a few nice people in a room which you can talk to if you want to. And of course, I can see that parallel working. I think 30 years ago we didn't think that people would be happy doing bank transactions without physical, without the human touch either. So I think it will change, but I agree with you. There will always be segments of people that want a guiding hand, and I'm sure, whatever service it will be, will have live human participation. But I just think it'll become the exception rather than the default. And again, I'm not saying this is going to happen tomorrow, but I think, maybe this is the longer-term impact, I think, of what we're seeing now in this technology.
A couple of things. One is, if you've got any questions or you want to join the conversation, please type away. It'll come up on the iPad here, and I'll interject it into the conversation. My second thought is, I think where we really get to is about choice. At the moment, if I want to buy a property, I'm in the US, I don't really have a choice. I go to a buyer's agent. I'm shoved into a process, and that process, I conform to the process doesn't conform to me. I'm here in Madrid, I've got an apartment here. I want to buy groceries. I have a choice. I can choose, no, I'm going to walk around to my corner store, I'm going to walk in there. I can't be bothered, I'll go online, I'll go to Glovo, and some guy knocks on my door 15 minutes later with my groceries. The process is conforming to me, my requirements. All three of us may have very different levels of comfort about how we engage. Okay, so you might have the person who's buying their one house for their life, and this is their biggest decision, and they are absolutely shitting themselves in this process. They're going to have their hand held, and no chatbot on the planet is going to give the love and tender and care of someone who's just taking someone who's nervous and got no idea through the process. Different from someone who's moving, I think 8 said he'd lived in 25 places in 10 years or something crazy, right? He doesn't need his hand held. What he needs is an efficient process that he knows that when he sees that place he's going to rent, that when he turns up on the Monday at 7 p.m., he gets through the door, it's right, it's ready. And I think what, for me, not the aha moment, but the thing that gets a bit more clear for me around this is we have to stop being the real estate process of the day and making people conform with us. We have to be the food delivery service or the shopping service, and allowing anyone to have a different experience as we try to conform to them.
I mean, regulator, of course, has a role to play, right? And we've also seen it in the opening up of fintech, of payment systems and online banking. So I think, clearly that's going to be an impediment. But, you look at some of the advances in real estate registry, blockchain platforms, you looked at the online identification of people, things are moving forward in quite a good way. So I think, clearly we need to build up trusted platforms for the transaction element to happen, but we think nothing about sending through our bank accounts digitally, thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. That's only one step away from buying a house online. Because you have a wholly trusted environment. It's a brand of the bank which you trust, and you've built up confidence maybe with some smaller transactions in the past and so on.
So how does... Oh, sorry, yes?
So I was just going to say, one thing that strikes me about this, and I think you're absolutely right about convenience and so on, but if I look at banking, there's a whole tranche of people who did it a certain way, are still doing it that way, etc. And maybe one of the questions in here is, do we have to begin to segment these services much more? You know, when we talk about search changing, I'm sure we're going to have a lot of people who just want to do search the way they've always done it on a portal, because that's kind of how they are, and they don't want to engage. So it seems to me, you know, beginning to break up that audience, understand the different behaviors, will become important, and different people will want different levels of that package.
Yeah.
So it's choice and convenience, I think.
Yeah, I think if there are 25 steps to a process and I'm comfortable with all 25 being automated, let me do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I'm nervous and you need someone, and I'm happy to pay a premium for it, then hold my hand, fill out the documents, make sure they're checked, and so on. And I think that's inevitable the way it goes. And then the question is the role of the portal versus the industry in making that happen. Who's going to win, and who has got the best chance of, because trust is critical in this element, in this process, sorry. Without trust, no one's going to do it.
I love the way you use the word industry to mean agents.
Yes,
Because it's not really the industry.
Yes.
It's a part of it. But now,
Yes.
you know, of course, agents. There will be plenty of people who want to use agents, and there's some amazingly good agents, and that's going to last for a while. But I think for a lot of smaller standardized transactions, especially when it's younger people buying, I doubt that the agent will have such a central role in the next 5 years.
It feels to me long term, you know, really long term, there is a platform. You no longer have the kind of sense of separate agencies, but you have people who are working through the platform. And that's not just agents, that's, you know, solicitors, conveyancers, etc. You know, all of those people in a single environment working cohesively around a transaction. Yeah. And how you get there is a real kind of interesting question, because at some point something needs to break and come together in the process, and whether that's the agents coming onto the platform or agents, you know, developing you know, their own kind of environment to do that in some way, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to see, and it might be different in different places.
I think we're going to see all of them. We're going to see agents grouping together to create perhaps common transaction platforms, and then we're going to see portals developing their own transaction capabilities with human assistance. And the whole monetization thing is going to have to change as well, right? Because the fewer, you know, people, when the role of the traditional agent is less important, you're not going to pay, you know, 3%, right?
No.
Which is why it's good that people like Hemnet have already worked out ways to get sellers to put $1,000 on the portal, right, to promote their property.
Let's talk move to a different area. And when I chatted with Andy here yesterday, and his view about, well, it's all going to come together with single platforms, you know, and so on. Do you agree with that?
I think he's underestimating the challenges in a European environment. And, you know, he's right at one level that, you know, there is an awful lot of commonality, and you know, people like Aviv are beginning to show that vision of getting to a common platform. But I come back in my mind, you know, a lot of portals, leading portals are, you know, 65% margin businesses. So, you know, the efficiency side is dealing with the efficiency of, you know, 25 to 35% of your revenue, and the production bit of that, the development bit of that is probably 4 or 5%. So I kind of think efficiency is a bit of a kind of red herring, and I think those platforms will end up inevitably having to be, even though they may be more efficient under the surface, you know, customized to some degree to the markets. And markets are defined a lot by history. You know, the states always had very similar kind of markets between the states. It may have had regional portals that came together, but I think that's quite different from very long histories in Europe of different ways of dealing with property and so on. So I think it's more of a challenge than he thinks. But I think it's also slightly a kind of red herring. I'm not sure that the people who do the technology really well will win, or the people who are the single players will necessarily win. I'm not sure those are two kind of competing dynamics. I think they'll both be just equally capable of being good or bad businesses as they move forward.
So,
from your perspective?
Consolidation is inevitable. I think when you're an advertising business, then, you know, being small isn't necessarily bad as long as you've got all the content on your platform. And we've seen, you know, Baltic Classifieds Group, tiny countries with incredibly profitable portals because they have all the content. As the whole function of a portal transfers to being something which needs much more tech, much more data, doing far more things, eventually managing a transaction, that requires a lot of investment. Now, then that's why, again, 8 has brought together these 5 fierce national champions and put them into one legal entity, not just one legal entity, one common technical platform, which is a huge step forward. And so clearly, the assumption there is that whoever has scale can provide, in time, better services at a better cost. I don't think it's necessarily, in my opinion, it's not just about optimization, it's about grabbing the next step change in value creation through, again, providing more services within the property ecosystem, and that does play to more investment. And let's face it, there are very few industries left where there isn't a very large American company that owns most of what's going on in Europe. That is unfortunately, that is just a fact. So, maybe Adevinta will, build a massive European champion that's too big for CoStar and the likes to buy, but the probability is that at some stage, one or other large American buyer will see Europe as a very attractive market holistically and make the necessary investments.
So I'm going to give you each $9 billion.
Where
are you going shopping this week?
I'm still a believer that this all favours the number ones, not the number twos. And I think we've seen lots of efforts and it's almost never does a number two kind of overtake or majorly successfully attack a number one. And usually it happens for some very specific reasons. Either the number one isn't very focused, or perhaps, there are occasions where actually you can pour a lot of money in and the number one isn't in a position to respond kind of financially in quite the same way. So you've got those kind of occasions. But most of the time, number ones are really solidly positioned. I think all the investment requirements, etc., and the fact of the kind of lock-in that you potentially get from really executing well on AI all tend to favor more of a move to a number one and a single platform environment.
You didn't tell me where you're going shopping.
Well, I'm going to I think the number ones, a lot of them are overvalued, so I'm not going shopping with my $9 billion necessarily there. I think I'd choose some other things.
Like what?
Actually, maybe at the moment I would shop for Adevinta, given the price that it's at, but I think I'm much more interested in the prop tech space and what I'd do there. I think that there's lots of opportunity there to really develop in that space. And I think, I'm earlier stage rather than later stage. I'm not sure I'd want to pay the money it would take to take Rightmove private and do something with it.
Do you believe in the mispricing in the market, some over, some undervalued, and the undervalued as being good buys?
I think, if you remember my revenue multiple slide, it's very interesting. Why is Zillow at 5x and a lot of the Europeans at 15? Is it just explained by MLS? I don't think so.
Or profitability?
But if you look at what they're investing in, that may bring profitability soon. Look, I think shopping is a difficult one, right? Because it has to be value. It has to be a price which creates value, and you have to have that plan on what you're going to how you're going to transform it. I think Rightmove is at that extreme of extremely profitable because it's been pared to the bone and it does one thing incredibly well. But to add value to a Rightmove, you probably have to completely transform it. So, the obvious companies to buy are the ones which are currently being held by private equity, right? They need an exit, whether it'll be an IPO or selling to another private equity. So those are the more obvious ones.
But they're not going to be the underpriced ones.
There's nothing's going to be underpriced, and I think this will, if I'm sitting, if I am sitting in the seat that Andy was sitting in yesterday, but the decision I would have to make is, can I pull off what I did in the US again, which is buy an underdog, and then use my data and my marketing power to such an extent that I can turn it from whatever number 5 to a number 2. I think none of us would want to make that bet on a European player, and of course it's unlikely. You'd have to buy one player per major European market. Yeah. So I think it's just much harder to pull off what he did in the US, and plus you've got also perhaps some of those.
And the question is what's pulling it off? Because I had a little dig into the numbers, right?
Yeah.
One thing is to drive traffic.
Yeah.
Right. That's one thing. The question is, can you drive the monetization at the same pace off the back end of it?
But I think you only do this because you're going to transform the experience. But although that's also interesting because CoStar's always been very broker-friendly, so you have to think how exactly you're going to transfer the experience. But particularly along the lines perhaps that Zoopla was showing with using much more third-party data and to really drive value into the process by really enhancing the information about property and then using that perhaps to charge for premium service.
Okay.
I think as well in the States, I mean, the homes.com transformation is about playing a different version of the business model with the brokers. And so there's a natural reason for the brokers want to move. I'm not quite sure I can see the same natural play that says, here I'm going to come do something so much better, for my client base, that actually they'll really want to back it and get on board with it and support it. So, and I'm not sure that just money does it. I mean, we've seen this in the cars market with, Heycar trying to create, with massive expenditure, portals that could rival the classifieds. And they go up to a certain level and then they just flatten. I mean, the brands are hugely powerful, very difficult to undermine. You've got to have something more than the brand behind the proposition to get people to change the behavior of a lifetime. And even though they only come once every 7 years, actually that's not true with a portal. 40% of them are on there all the time doing their, nosy property watching.
Yep. So, gentlemen, we're going to wrap up, but one last sort of quick question to both of you. We're sitting here again in 5 years' time. What's the main topic?
Oh, what a good question. You go first, Malcolm.
Next gen.
That's a cop-out.
I think maybe it will be really about how brokers and marketplaces are coming together. Because I think, we've got two very different sides. I think we'll be at a point where that crunch is coming and we'll be engaging with that topic.
And in doing that, do you think maybe looking at what's happening in the emerging markets, the Latin American markets and Southeast Asian markets, will actually give guidance back?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm a great believer, and we've said this before, that everybody's going to end up on one platform one day, and that you've got, the Asian markets coming at it from a different direction from the European and the American markets. And I think because of the lack of infrastructure in the earlier stages in Asian markets, they're going to get there, well, they are getting there faster in terms of how those platforms and relationships are structured. So I think if you really want to look at the future, it's well worth keeping an eye on what happens in Asia.
So I would say a number of things. I think clearly we won't be using the term portals anymore. I think we'll be talking about property marketplaces because there will be much more transactions going on. And the point I made right at the beginning, I think we both agree on that maybe one of these new big entities will be coming from the tech-enabled brokerage side. And you've got people like Engel and Volcus who have pan-European footprints. You could imagine that kind of company trying to become one of those massive property transaction businesses. So I think that'll be the main thing. I still think there may be differences. Southeast Asia, very different price points in some of these countries, different economics. And I do think that we would have moved away from the subscription. That's definitely a bet. We'll be moving to transaction-based pricing.
Fantastic. Gentlemen, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and insights over these days.
Thank you.
Thank you.